Good afternoon, everyone, again. Now we will start this session. I would now request Dr. Das to please introduce our speaker.
Um, okay, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Kaushik Das, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, respected alumni who have joined us from around the globe, respected faculty members of the department, and colleagues from other institutes, and my dear students. I consider this a rare honor as I introduce to you the speaker of the next presentation. We are delighted to have with us today Professor V.S. Murthy, the Honorable Director of IIT Hyderabad. Professor Murthy is one of the most prominent metallurgists and material scientists of this country. He is renowned not only in India but also abroad for his pioneering work on non-equilibrium processing of materials by mechanical alloying. Professor Murthy has also pioneered the study of high entropy alloys in India. He has also made significant contributions in the areas of grain refinement of aluminum alloys, in the areas of aluminum matrix composites, in the areas of metallic glasses, and also in multifunctional nanocrystalline ceramics. Professor Murthy is a recipient of numerous national and international awards. I will not be able to list all of them because of the time, but I will only list the following. He is a recipient of the Santi Swarup Bhatnagar Award, which he received in 2007, and he has also received the J.C. Bose Fellowship Award in 2018. He is also a fellow of the World Academy of Sciences since 2018. Professor Murthy has published extensively with close to 500 journal publications, with more than 15,000 citations. He has also filed over 20 patents. In addition to being an outstanding researcher, he is also an outstanding teacher. His NPTEL courses on advanced thermodynamics are some of the most popular courses in the field of metallurgy and materials engineering. So today, Professor Murthy is going to deliver a lecture on excitement in probing materials in nanoscale. So without further ado, I would request Professor Murthy to take over. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, friends. Are you able to see the PPT that is coming up?
Yes.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. It's good to get connected to, I still call it as B College. Okay, that is what I was knowing it when I was at Kharagpur. Quite a good, great personalities in metallurgy have come out. And particularly, I would say I have quite a number of friends from B College, including Professor Manna and Mukhopadhyay, and also we call Parthoda, who is NIFT Ranchi director now. So quite a number of good friends. So, and I used to visit often B College when I was at IIT Kharagpur. Of course, I moved to IIT Madras for about 15 years, and last 10 months I am here. So let me tell you something which is something which is very close to my heart, and I have been introduced into this particular technique called atom probe almost I would say 20 years back. It was 1999 when I went to Japan to work with one gentleman by name Dr. Hono for about 2 years. And day and night I was doing basically electron microscopy and atom probe tomography. And that's such a fascinating tool, which now we have been able to bring it to the country. And it took almost, I would say, about 17 years, 15 years at least after I returned to India from Japan. And it was a struggle which I wanted to share with you and to tell you that if you have dreams, dreams should be as colorful as possible. This is what Abdul Kalam always says. Okay, and you should pursue your dreams with a vigor. And when you pursue your dreams with a vigor, automatically there will be a satisfaction in what you achieve, and you would be able to reach your goals with a lot of passion. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, and then start this exciting journey into materials. All of us metallurgists know that microscopy is crucial to understand materials, and the so-called microstructure property correlations is something every physical metallurgist is supposed to be knowing all about. This journey has been very, very, I think, long. Many, I would say even centuries back, people wanted to probe into materials. And they realized that your eyes are insufficient to probe deep into materials. All of us know that a good eye, a normal eye, has a resolution of the order of around 0.1 millimeters. Okay, anything smaller than 0.1 millimeter from a distance of about 1 foot, you will not be able to see well. Of course, quite a number of us, including me, have a very bad eyesight, so it still worsens the situation. And there have been people who wanted to probe deeper, and that is how microscopes have come. The first microscope which you see on the screen was almost 1600s. And I do not know whether you know who brought this first. It was Galileo. Many of us know Galileo for his telescopy, but he is also the one who brought the first microscope. And people went further to a great extent from this kind of a microscope that you are seeing in front of you to much greater microscopes with much higher resolutions, which is what we are going to see today. And also people went farther from a normal two-dimensional microscopy through to a three-dimensional microscopy. Our whole talk of today is three-dimensional microscopy, and people have even further moved to go to what is called 4D microscopy. So how do things evolve as a function of time? This is another thing that's a great excitement that people have in this particular field. But I will not be touching upon this aspect. There are great people within this country who do a lot of in situ microscopy, and they will be able to talk much more than. We all are aware of this as a metallurgist, this microstructure. Everyone, possibly in the second year physical metallurgy lab class, you would have seen the microscope that is there on the left side and the microstructure that's there on the right side, the so-called perlite. Okay, so from the kind of microscope that I showed you in the previous slide to this kind of a microscope that you have here, where we have grown significantly, but even this microscope is not able to go deeper into materials. Many of us, when we have read in second year physical metallurgy, we know that this particular optical microscope has a resolution limit of the order of around 0.2 micron. That's about 200 nanometers. So, and the whole world of nanotechnology talks about nanomaterials, and we generally define nanomaterial as that where one of the dimensions is less than 100 nanometers. So if you want to see something less than 100 nanometers, obviously this microscope will not work. Okay, in spite of whatever things that we can do, you can possibly use a filter and variety of things that we are taught in second year BTech. But in spite of all that, you cannot really see nanostructures using this kind of a microscope. And the need of that kind of things comes from this kind of studies. Many of you possibly are aware of how the whole concept of aerospace aluminum alloys evolved, the so-called duraluminum. There's a great guy by name Wilm who knew that steel, when it is taken to a higher temperature and quenched, it becomes hard. All of us are aware of this. In metallurgy, we talk about the so-called martensite that forms. And so he thought possibly a similar thing can happen to aluminum alloys. So he took an aluminum copper alloy in 1903, around that time frame, and he tried to every time take this alloy, heat it to high temperature, quench it in water, and look at the hardness. Every time he found that the hardness was lower than what it was in the as-cast condition actually. And he almost frustrated, but as a good researcher, he never gave up. That's supposed to be one of the very important characteristics of a good researcher, that the story goes as if he has gone over a weekend somewhere and comes back on the Monday once again and restarts as a typical metallurgist, changing the temperature parameters a little bit and possibly the quenching rate a little bit. So in the process, he tried once more. Okay, and in the process, he said, let me take up this quenched sample that I have quenched it on Friday, and let me see what its hardness is before I once again do this experiment of heating and quenching. And he suddenly found that the hardness of the alloy was much higher than what it was on Friday. This was the so-called age hardening concept that has evolved. And there was a company called Dural, which has immediately patented it and started selling this particular alloy. And that is how the Wright brothers used this particular alloy in their first flight. But why was this particular alloy became harder? Nobody knew. And people had to wait almost for about 30 years for a development of a new microscope. This is called a transmission electron microscope. In 1932, Ernst Ruska, comes up with this microscope, and it was around 35 or so when somebody has put this particular aluminum copper alloy into that kind of a microscope and was able to see the so-called precipitates, which are extremely small, as thin as around 20-30 nanometers. And that is when now people started saying that this whole increase in the hardness has happened because of the precipitates, and a normal optical microscopy was not able to show those precipitates, and this is now called precipitation hardening. A metallurgist would call it as a precipitation hardening, an industrialist will still call it as the age hardening, and that is how the whole concept has evolved. And this was possible. The connection between the hardening and the reason for the hardening was possible only when this kind of microscopes came into picture. Interestingly, he had to wait almost for 50 years to get a Nobel Prize, and in 1986, luckily he was alive and he got his Nobel Prize along with those inventors of scanning tunneling microscope. And microscopes have further grown to better and better resolutions. This particular microscope, what we have at IIT Madras, and quite a number of places now in India, is called Titan, which can give you a resolution of about 0.8 angstroms. Please understand, 0.8 angstroms. That is the level of resolution that one can get. What you are seeing on the right bottom is the silicon dumbbells in a semiconductor, and this kind of resolution is possible now. And there was one more discovery that came using this particular electron microscope by a gentleman by name Dan Shetman, who was again doing a similar work like Wilm. But not quenching from a solid state, but quenching from a liquid state. So he was melting alloys and doing a quenching experiment from the liquid state, which we now call it as melt spinning. So he was making what is called rapidly solidified aluminum alloys to make stronger and stronger aluminum alloys, and he was able to precipitate in one such aluminum alloy, which is an aluminum manganese alloy, and when he put his electron beam onto that precipitate that you see on the right bottom, he got a diffraction pattern that is shown at the center top of this particular image, slide, and where you see, interestingly, a 10-fold symmetry. In fact, in his notebook, which is dated April 8, 1982, he remarks there 10-fold, which is a kind of a question mark, because nobody else has seen it till then. And he went to his postdoc supervisor, John Kahn, and he tells him that I have seen something like this. And John Kahn actually says nothing like this is possible. And in fact, it went to the extent that he was asked to leave the group. And John Kahn tells him that you are bringing disgrace to this particular group. You are keep on talking about something called quasi-crystal, which does not exist. And that is the kind of understanding that people had, crystallographers had at that particular point of time, that a 5-fold symmetry is considered to be forbidden symmetry. And he is one who never gave up, and kept on trying and finally, with the help of some mathematicians, okay, he was able to prove. So it took almost for 2 years for him to publish his work. In 1984, he published, and now 2011, he got a Nobel Prize for his, possibly the first metallurgist to have got a Nobel Prize, in my view. So again, this kind of a diffraction pattern is possible only with an electron microscopy. If you take the similar alloy and put it in a normal X-ray diffraction technique, you will simply get peaks, and you will not be able to differentiate between a quasi-crystal and a crystal very easily. Okay, and the so-called forbidden five-fold symmetry is something that you will be able to see easily in an electron microscope. Of course, now people have been able to make much bigger quasi-crystalline samples and are doing single crystal experiments using X-ray, and also using Laue patterns. People are able to get five-fold patterns, but that is much later. Okay, and one can also see this kind of images. This particular slide again shows you one such quasi-crystalline thing where every dot that you see, a white dot that you see, is an atom. So we are able to image atoms in an alloy. Okay, and that is the level to which microscopy has been able to go. And if you carefully observe this, you see a five-fold symmetries in this particular thing coming out of a quasi-crystalline. So indicating that the atoms are arranged in some kind of a quasi-crystalline periodicity, quasi-periodicity we call it as. But what is interesting is all these are 2D images. Okay, that is something. So what we see in this particular case is electron beam goes through a sample, comes out of the sample, and what is there inside the sample is projected onto a screen at the bottom, and what you see at that projected image is what you are seeing it. Okay, and then people always thought, can I go further? And in 1955, there is a group, Professor Mueller and his postdoc student by name Kanwar Bahadur, again an Indian here, interestingly, from National Physical Laboratory, working with him. They were trying to see atoms on surfaces. Many of us know that what is called catalysis. Okay, so for a catalyst, the surface matters a lot. So how atoms are arranged on a surface plays a very significant role on how it behaves as a good catalyst. So he was looking at samples. One day he was so excited to see an image like this, what you see on this particular slide, where every dot is an atom. And if you carefully observe, the so-called four-fold symmetry is seen here, and this is coming out of a platinum surface. And he was so excited, and he goes to Professor Mueller and says, I saw it. And for the first time, he was able to. Again, there is a very interesting story behind this. Okay, so Professor Mueller, always was asking his students to look at the samples in a particular way. And this Kanwar Bahadur one day felt that I am not able to see the atoms. So possibly let me freeze the atoms by taking the sample to a very low temperature. So he did not inform his professor that he is cooling his sample to a very low temperatures, and after cooling the sample to a very low temperature, suddenly an image like this appeared. So the moment you freeze the atoms, atomic vibrations come down. So as a result, atomic image can easily be seen. And he then calls his professor and tells him that I am able to see, and then reveals the secret how he was able to see. So this is very important for students to know, that it is important to not believe in what your professor says always, and try on your own, and you will one day be a great scientist which the whole world will remember. And another great scientist here on the image that you see on top, my own PhD supervisor, Professor Ranganathan, at his very young age, working on a field ion microscopes. So field ion microscopy has become very popular, and quite a number of people have been interested in it. But then what is again interesting in a field ion microscopy is, again, you are only seeing atoms and you don't know what those atoms are. And people's interest is, can I see atoms in 3D, in 3 dimensions, and at the same time find out where what atom is sitting. For example, if I have steel, I have iron and carbon, I want to know where is iron, where is carbon. Is it possible to find out? And that's where the whole journey started. People started talking about tomography. We are all aware of CT scans For example, somebody is sick, some problem, we do various scans in the hospitals. So similar CT scan, can I do a CT scan of a metallurgical sample at the atomic level? And that is how atom probe tomography has come into picture with an extremely high resolution as small as 1 angstrom. Okay, and that is what we are going to talk about. And this whole field evolved from almost 1950s onwards to what is called a local electrode atom probe, which in 2002 Tom Kelly comes up with. And what we are now talking about is that LEAP, which we have it at IIT Madras, and also of course IISc Bangalore also has got one. Let's try to understand what this LEAP is all about and what are the exciting things that it can tell us. Okay, what you see images on the right side here is a tip of a sample, okay, and where different colors that you see, colored dots that you see, each dot is an atom. And I can find out which atom is where in this kind of a sample, and I can pick up a small region inside that particular region and then do a compositional analysis to find out what is the composition of a specific region. Just to give you an example, let's say if we talk about precipitation in aluminum copper alloy, which we talked about it earlier, we all say the first phase to come out in a precipitation sequence in an aluminum copper alloy is GP zones. Everybody talks about these GP zones. And nobody knows what is the composition of these GP zones. Everybody says possibly it is a copper rich cluster. Is it 100% copper? How much of copper is there in such a cluster? And these clusters are known to be as small as about 2 to 3 nanometers. And in such a small 2 to 3 nanometer cluster, can I find out the composition? And this is a technique which can show you that. And what you see on the left here is one such atom probe, which is called a LEAP. And we have that at IIT Madras, and quite a number of people have been using now. And I will talk about it as we go along. And just to know what is the principle of this whole thing. This all works on what is called time of flight measurements. Okay, that basically means the time that an atom takes to travel a certain distance is dependent on its mass. This is what people call it as mass spectroscopy. Exactly this is what is used in this whole technique, where what we do is using a laser or a pulsed voltage, we pull out an atom from the tip of a sample. Okay, and that goes through a local electrode which is there on here, and then gets reflected from a reflector, and then comes and gets deposited onto a detector. Once it hits, the atom hits the detector, okay, the position, XY position coordinates of this particular atom are recorded, and the time that it has taken from the moment it has been dislodged from the tip to the moment it has reached the detector is noted. Like this, you keep on doing layer by layer, okay, and restitch all these layers to generate the whole tip once again. So this is like stitching all the layers to create a 3D image from a 2D layers. This is exactly anybody does in a CT scan. And only thing is we are doing this CT scan at the atomic level. That's the beauty of it. Okay, and preparing a tip is very important for this. Okay, so the reason is unless the tip is very sharp, the field that we are applying on the tip has to be higher than the interatomic forces to pull an atom out of it. And we all know a field is basically the voltage that you are applying on the tip and divided by the sharpness of the tip. So we need to prepare a very sharp tip. The tip diameter should be as small as 50 to 100 nanometers. That kind of a tip that you need to prepare. When I was working in the early 2000s, I was there from 99 to 2001 in Tsukuba in Japan. Those days, the only technique that was available is an electropolishing technique. So you use an electropolishing technique to convert a sheet of a sample to a needle by polishing it through an electrolyte and then sharpening it like a pencil that we sharpen using a blade. Almost similar thing that has been done those days. But now we have a new technique called what is called FIB, focused ion beam available. Quite a number of people use this more often now, and it is nothing but a scanning electron microscope where you use two beams. In a SEM, we usually use an electron beam to see the sample. Here, in addition to an electron beam, you have an ion beam to cut the sample. So this ion beam is used like a milling machine, okay, at a very small scale, and you can actually drill holes inside a sample using that. And as you keep on doing it, you keep on observing it using what is called the electron beam. So as a result, you can take a flat sample first and identify a region that you want to cut. For example, if there is a grain boundary, let us say here, you can use this particular ion beam to cut on the both the sides of that particular grain boundary in such a way that you can actually cut that grain boundary from one region. And this particular thing now comes out like a cantilever, and that cantilever is welded to a small tip, which we call it as an Omri probe. And once you do that, it is lifted from the sample and then put onto what we call it as a micro pillars. On this micro pillar, you keep it and once again weld it on that. All this welding, everything, cutting, everything you are doing in an SEM, please understand this. Okay, and then you sharpen the tip to such that it is made into a very sharp tip. So from a sheet of sample, I'm converting a sample into a sharp needle. And once you do that, we can do wonderful things. I just want to start what can you do from what I have started with about 20 years back. So those days, our interest was to know what happens to a metallic glass when you heat it. Okay, so we were working on what are called bulk metallic glasses, and we find that when you heat a glass, certain glasses, they get converted into a quasi-crystal, certain glasses get converted into a crystal. So people were not understanding why does it happen like this, why certain cases you get a quasi-crystal, why in certain cases you get a crystal. So I somehow believed that oxygen plays a very important role because people have found for the same composition, one group reports one type of a crystal coming out of that when you heat it, and another group for the same composition, they were reporting that you get a quasi-crystal. So people were always confused why same alloy gives two different things by two different groups. And I was arguing that basically when they were melting their alloys, maybe the oxygen content of the alloys were different, and possibly this is why it is happening. So I deliberately made 3 samples, let's say a large number of samples have been made. I'm just only showing you 3 samples with different oxygen contents. The alloy composition is the same, zirconium, copper, aluminum alloy, with only the oxygen content being different. And now if you put these samples into a DSC, you see the one with a very low oxygen content shows you only one DSC peak, whereas the ones with a higher oxygen content show 2 peaks. And when you take this particular glass and start heating it in a DSC and take those samples and put it in a XRD, you see that the alloy with a low oxygen content, okay, shows you only a crystal coming out, whereas the alloy with a high oxygen content shows first a quasi-crystal to come out and then it becomes a crystal later. How do I know that these peaks are quasi-crystal? Because a large number of alloys people have studied. So by looking at these peaks, I can say, but the best result comes from an electron microscope. So if you take these 2 alloys, put it in an electron microscope, the one with a lower oxygen content gives you a crystal. And if you take a diffraction pattern from that, it shows you a crystalline diffraction pattern. Whereas the alloy with a higher oxygen content, it gives you spherical particles as a crystallization product. And if I put my beam on any one of these particles and take what is called a diffraction pattern, it shows you 5-fold symmetry. So telling you that these particles are all quasi-crystalline particles. We wanted to know whether the oxygen is going into these quasi-crystalline particles to stabilize these particles. But unfortunately, the typical what is called EDS mapping that you can do in an electron microscopy cannot show you this very clearly, because oxygen is a low atomic number atom. Of course, now you have titan and things like that where you can possibly see this. But those days when we went to the atom probe, we were able to see that there is a small particle here, and that particle has very low copper content, aluminum content, but it has a large oxygen content when compared to the rest of the region. and to tell you that that particular particle, which is a quasicrystalline particle, is enriched in oxygen, and we were able to demonstrate for the first time that oxygen stabilizes a quasicrystal, and that was possible only with an atom probe. Now, people have been doing many such things, and one such example I wanted to show you is what is called ODS steels, oxide dispersion strengthened steels. People have been putting, yttria oxide particles into steel and make it by powder metallurgy technique and use that powder to hip it and finally make a tube out of it. This is a 4-meter long tube. IGCAR together with ARCI, DMRL and NFC have been able to make such a long tube, which is used as a what is called a nuclear fuel pin, where you can put a nuclear fuel and subject it to a fission reaction. What is interesting is such a oxide dispersion strengthened steel has a much higher strength at higher temperatures when compared to normal steels that people are aware of, and it has a better creep resistance that people have seen. Now the particles are extremely small here, and I want to know what happens to this particle after it is put into steel, whether any chemical reaction happens. Will the composition of the yttria nanoparticles change? So again, if you look at the TEM, you won't see anything excepting that it is a small particle. Okay, and you can do possibly what is called a nano diffraction, get some diffraction pattern from that, do some high resolution microscopy, but what an atom probe can show you is what does that particle contain. It's a 2 nanometer particle, please understand, and it can show you what atoms are sitting inside that particular particle, yttrium sitting, oxygen sitting, chromium sitting. Not only that, it can also show that it is possibly having a core shell structure with some chromium oxide in the center and some kind of a titanium oxide on the surface. This kind of information atom probe can give you. And now we have this kind of a microscope in our lab in Chennai, and what we did this as a very unique facility, we call it as a national facility, about 7 different institutions. Okay, I can add one more, which is DAE, Department of Atomic Energy, has also given money, and with all this money and the money that DST gave us, we were able to get about 40 crores, each institution paying almost 2 crores each, and we call them as partners. And with these 8 partners and the support of the what is called Nano Mission, we were able to set up this whole atom probe costed about 40 crores. Okay, about 30 crores atom probe and a FIB and a TEM put together is what we call it as NFAPT, National Facility for Atom Probe Tomography. But what is very interesting here is we have been able to make this atom probe work in a remote fashion, that now people who are sitting in these partner institutions will have a computer in front of them which has the whole software loaded in that. So they send a sample to us, and we polish the sample, put it into the microscope. The moment it has been put into an atom probe, the person sitting in Delhi, Kanpur, Kharagpur and so on can operate the whole microscope sitting in their lab. Okay, that is the beauty of it. This is the first of its kind in the whole world, I can confidently say this. And there are about 100 atom probes, leaps in the world, but out of these 100, this is the first one which has been able to be made in this particular fashion. And we are running it in a 24/7 basis with 3 shifts. We have 3 operators who come in 3 shifts and operate this. And we keep getting samples from various partners, and it works. And this particular image that you see at the middle, all the pink atoms are all iron atoms, and these green kind of small particles that you are seeing, each one of them is a yttrium nanoparticle, which has not just yttrium, and it has other atoms. For example, if you can look at this and get individual mappings of each elements, you will see chromium, tungsten, iron, all of them are uniformly distributed, excepting yttrium, titanium and oxygen. So just to tell you that what is this particle, and I can pick up every one of that particle and find out the exact composition of that. Is it what kind of a stoichiometry this has? So we were able to find out that these are Y2 Ti2O7 kind of particles. So one can find out the exact composition of a particle by doing this. And this is now being used for various applications. A lot of people are using it. And this is one such example of a high entropy alloy, where it has 5 elements in it, and we can see how uniformly these elements are distributed. We can also see nitrogen, we can see oxygen, people can also see hydrogen. Okay, we all know that hydrogen is the smallest atom, atomic number 1. Okay, and there is no other spectroscopy technique can show you where hydrogen atoms are sitting. And we know in metallurgy, for example, hydrogen embrittlement and things like that, people believe that hydrogen goes possibly to grain boundaries and embrittles, but nobody was able to see that. Now there are reports where people are able to find out where hydrogen is sitting in a particular alloy, and this is all possible. And one can also see that in certain alloys there can be segregation of these particular atoms in various regions. This is another 6-component high entropy alloy where the copper atoms are all segregated at one end and iron atoms are segregated other, because iron and copper are immiscible. So when you make an alloy and cast this alloy, and you would see that in certain regions there will be segregations that happen. Okay, and we can also find out whether an alloy is very uniform in its composition, even at the grain boundaries. So what we can do is, using an atom fib, we can cut a sample along the grain boundary so that the tip that you are making here will have a grain boundary going along in the longitudinal axis from top to bottom, so that you can see whether this alloy has any specific segregation of a particular element at the grain boundary. Interestingly, these alloys that I am showing you here, the 5-component and the 4-component alloy, do not have even any segregation at the grain boundary. We wanted to know this because we were studying some diffusion experiments, and we wanted to know whether there is any segregation at the grain boundary which is somehow enhancing the diffusion at the grain boundaries. To understand that, this kind of things we had to do. And people are now able to do variety of things. This is an alloy which is a steel, for example, and we know that in a steel, the ferrite has very little carbon in it and the austenite has a lot of carbon in it. So we can actually clearly see this kind of things here. And this is a austenitic region where all the carbon is segregated. Okay, whereas in the ferritic region you have very little carbon. So this kind of a thing can be found out, and one can take a kind of a small cylinder along this particular region and find out what is called line scan. In SEM we do line scan. A similar line scan you can do, and to find out a particular region where if there is any carbon segregation and enhancement in its concentration. One can do all this very easily. So I have just 2-3 more slides just to tell you that this can be done for a variety of alloys. This is another alloy which is basically what is called a fine metal alloy, which are basically magnetic alloys, where people wanted to add a small amount of copper, and people have found that just with 1% of copper in that, it changes the whole precipitation sequence, and they found that there are clusters of copper in this alloy. Okay, and these clusters can be easily seen, and the composition of that cluster can be found out. To the extent that one can also see grain boundaries. This is another region where the grain boundary has a segregation of sodium and potassium. Okay, and one can cut the sample, prepare the sample, and be able to see the segregations very easily and find out the concentration of the regions very easily. And just to end the talk, I can tell you what kind of alloys and materials that can be seen. I have divided this into 2 groups. One are called structural materials, like what we know generally, the high strength or high toughness materials and things like that. So for example, high strength steels, variety of alloys, aluminum, magnesium, titanium, nickel based superalloys. You can see what kind of precipitates are, what is the early stage of precipitation in these alloys can be found out. For example, if I have a glass, for example, metallic glass, what is the composition of the short range order in a metallic glass? We know that a metallic glass is a thing that you get from a liquid, and liquid has a short range order, and the short range order gets frozen in a metallic glass. What is the composition of the short range order? If I want to find out, we can find out. We can find out the grain boundary compositions and so many things like this. We can also look at various functional materials. Okay, starting from battery materials, magnetic materials, ferroelectric materials, multiferroids, graphene, carbon nanotubes, even core shell nanoparticles. Okay, all of these can be studied, and variety of people have been studying and various things, and one can easily understand many of these exciting advanced materials and design newer materials based on the understanding that you are getting and come up with the advanced material. I think with that, I will stop. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, sir, for such an amazing presentation. Sir, if you don't mind, we would like to ask you a few questions from
Sure.
our curious attendees.
Sure.
Sir, is it okay, sir?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Over to Ritam, please ask.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful session. Our participants have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So the first question is from a participant. He says, "Sir, I am passionate about developing a career in the field of research and academics.
Yes.
I will begin my third year, and at this stage, I am not aware of the avenues that are open to me. What advice would you like to give me so that I can make it to the most eminent institutes of India? And also, sir, if you could tell us something about PMRF."
Yeah. PMRF is a very attractive fellowship. I mean, originally started with an intention to reduce the brain drain, for example, because many students think that I would like to go, abroad and then do my PhD and things like that. Now you look at this atom probe. I don't think every university in US has an atom probe. Okay, now we have 2 atom probes in this country, and in 5 years, I'm expecting 5 more atom probes to come. Okay, we are thinking of having one at IIT Hyderabad, for example. Okay, so when you have this kind of facilities, very fascinating facilities, and excellent brains in the country, I believe there is no need to go somewhere and pursue this. This is something that I wanted to say, and that is the PMRF has been one of those avenues that people have come up with, and it gives you a higher scholarship, of course. And now the PMRF, the whole concept has been changed when compared to the earlier years. That from this year onwards, PMRF, you have to be first selected to an IIT or an IISc, and once you are selected, among those who are selected, the institute will nominate a few people based on their biodata to an apex committee, and the apex committee will identify those out of those nominated a few people in such a way that each institution gets a certain number of PMRF people. In addition to that, whoever are already doing PhD, if they have completed their coursework, okay, we have 2 modes here. One is called lateral entry mode, one is called direct entry mode. Direct entry is what I have told you in the beginning, so somebody directly joining. Second is what is called lateral entry, somebody who has already joined in an IIT or IISc. If he is interested in a PMRF, again, if he has completed his coursework and comprehensive exam, such people will be selected. Again, each department will nominate a few, and these nominations again go to an apex committee, and an apex committee will identify some people. So immediately they get converted from a normal MHRD scholarship to a PMRF scholarship. And now we are also trying to do in a various IITs that these PMRF candidates are even given a chance to collaborate with one, let's say, professor from even abroad under what is called a joint supervision program, so that one can get an advantage of a stalwart outside the country and a stalwart within the country, and PMRF students can choose a professor of their choice with whom they would like to work. So opportunities are enormous. Only thing is you need to have a passion. I only want to say, do not join PhD just because you have not got any job. Okay, PhD need to be done by people who are passionate about it. Okay, so it is not, it should not be an option. Okay, it should be the only option. Then only you will really become a scientist one day where people will remember you. Okay, any other questions?
Sir, over to our next question.
Yeah.
The next question is, Professor Manu Prakash from Stanford University developed a $1 microscope having 140x magnification. Yes, the magnification is no way comparable to that of atom probe microscopy, but could you please enlighten us with the possibility of such low-cost options, given that all institutes may not be able to afford such expensive instruments?
Yeah, but you know, it is 140x, 140 magnification. You can get even with a small, what is called magnifying glass, a magnification, right? So you look at what is the resolution that such a microscope can give you. Okay, it is important to have microscopes of various levels for various applications. If I have a very fine print, okay, on a newspaper, I just need a magnifying glass to make it larger and see it. But if I want to see, let's say, where atoms are sitting at a grain boundary, for example, many of you might have read, if you are in the final year BTech metallurgy, let us say, once upon a time, people had, superalloys where they wanted to increase the toughness of it. So they added a small amount of boron in 30-40 ppm level. Suddenly, the alloys have become extremely tough, and people who did not know what is this boron doing. And people said it is going to the grain boundaries and doing something. Okay. And now with this kind of atom probes, you can see them. You can see where which element is sitting. So obviously such microscope will be costlier. Okay. So it depends on what are you looking for. Okay. You don't need everything for every purpose. Okay. For example, if you want to just see small letters, as I told you before, you just need a magnifying glass, nothing else. So depending on the need, you should have microscopes. And each of these microscopes should lead us to new discoveries of materials so that we come up. As a metallurgist, our job is to design materials, design alloys. Okay. The so-called high entropy alloys, let's say, it is designing new alloys, okay, for new applications or existing applications with extremely better performance. Okay, so this is my comment on your question.
Okay, sir, we have one more question.
Yes.
That is, what are some of the cutting-edge research topics in material science which are expected in India and worldwide in the coming decade or so?
A very, very, very wide question, wide open question. See, there are so many. I mean, I can tell you one. Even steels is an advanced material. There is so much of research happening in steel. Okay, you open ACTAMET, which is one of the best journals. You will see that every 2-3 months you will have an article in steels, on steels. So that is the kind of depth that one can go in everything. There is nothing called a mundane topic. Okay, so starting from healthcare. Okay, materials for healthcare, for example, nanomaterials. For example, recently one of our colleague at IIT Hyderabad has come up with a test kit for COVID, which can test whether someone has COVID or not in 20 minutes. Again, he uses certain nanoparticles for them. Okay, so from that kind of a thing where healthcare to advanced, let's say, aerospace materials, where you can come up with newer materials, newer turbine blade materials. There is a vast variety of materials one can do. Okay, and so it is, and I can also tell you, because you are asking this question, one day if you want to become a professor like me, let us say, if you can pursue, let's say process metallurgy, let's say about, making of metals, the so-called extractive metallurgy. Okay, everybody wants to go away from it. I can tell you there will be a red carpet welcome for you when you finish your PhD. Every IIT want to grab you, provided you have written good papers. Because most of the IITs now do not have people working or people who are capable of teaching, let's say, iron making, steel making. We do not have even one such person in IIT Hyderabad. And every time, every 6 months, we try to advertise for people, and nobody is there in the world appears to be who are working on things like this. So even fields like that, there is so much of exciting things one can do. Okay, so there is no dearth of, I would say, fields available for you to pursue. You have to identify what do I want to pursue. Many a times I would also say that at the BTech level, it is very difficult to say what do I want to pursue. Which field is better? There is nothing called better in this thing. Because, for example, in your body, every part is important. When people talk about this branch of engineering is better than this branch of engineering, I say you are a fool. Okay, every branch of engineering is equally important. Okay, branch of engineering gives you a higher salary, it does not mean that it is better than something else. Okay, so similarly, every field in metallurgy has equal importance. So the best thing that I suggest is, are you working with a person who can excite you. This is the most and foremost important thing. So try to go to such universities, such places, and work with such people who can make you excited about your research, so that you pursue that particular research, whether it is steel making or whether it is nanomaterials or biotechnology, it doesn't matter. As long as you pursue it with a passion, you would one day be recognized. This is my suggestion.
Okay, sir, we have just another question for you.
Yes.
How for a case of microscopy, the magnification should be differentiated from resolution?
Oh, the second year metallurgy itself, we come to know this. Magnification is different from resolution. As a scientist, we should talk about resolution rather than, because magnification can be done even digitally. Okay, you cannot improve the resolution digitally. Okay, so resolution is the smallest distance between any two regions or spots that you can clearly see. Okay, and that is for that you need the kind of, for example, if I have let's say two stones. Okay, I want to see these two stones separately using something. So to see anything, you need some kind of a radiation. For example, if you are sitting in front of me, how do I see you? Because the light is falling on your face and getting reflected and coming into my eyes, I will be able to see you. If we are sitting in a dark room, I cannot see you. So it is a light which is making me see you. So, and if this light I try to use to differentiate between two atoms, I cannot do, because the wavelength of the light is much larger than the distance between the atoms. So if you want to see atoms, the wavelength of the radiation that you use should be of the order of the distance between the atoms. That is the reason why we need to go to to electron microscopy, where the wavelength of the electrons is much smaller than interatomic distances, or the wavelength of X-rays is of the order of interatomic distances. And that is how people have been able to go. So you need to understand the concept of resolution to understand the microscopy much better. Yes, anything more?
Yes, sir, we have one question here. Can you briefly explain pseudo-electron microscopy?
Pseudo.
CYR.
Sir, sorry, he is talking about cryo-electron microscopy.
Cryo, okay. Cryo-electron microscopy. Basically, it is like freezing a sample to very low temperatures and trying to understand. See, because many a times you want to observe certain phenomena in a material, and particularly when you want to see certain features where there are particularly people use it for biological samples. Okay, so you want to freeze them so that there is no movements in the samples, to be able to see the features that you would like to see. Okay, and of course there are other examples also where you need to cool your sample to extremely low temperatures to be able to see. I mean, particularly, if you are interested in even low temperature phenomena in materials. Okay, how to see diffusion in certain materials at a low temperatures. You need to cool the samples to extremely low, or certain precipitation phenomena that you want to see. Okay, one can look at this. There are so many examples one can talk about it, where you cool the sample and then look at it. That is what is cryo microscopy. Anything more?
Okay, sir. Thank you for your wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All the best to all of you.
Thank you, sir. We are very grateful and honored to have had you among us. Thank you, sir, for such an amazing presentation. We look forward to more of such wonderful sessions from you.
Thank you. All to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day to all of you too. Bye bye.